Well, good to see you again. Thank you for clicking play. I'm glad you've decided to join us again. Don't take that for granted, so it's good to see you again. As you're well aware, the season that we're in has many challenges. And one of the more pressing challenges that Cindy and I face many times through the week is what local establishment do we want to support tonight for dinner. And we're just feeling a call from God to support the local economy and help some of these restaurants, and so we're doing our best in that way. And we're not leaving out the ice cream places either. We were very excited to see Brewster's come on the scene, so one of our other pressing challenges is where do we go tonight, Brewster's or Meadows? And we like both, and we're working on our quarantine 15 to be sure. And but those are just some of the challenges that we're facing. But as you all know, there are many other more significant challenges that we're all dealing with as we walk into what people are calling now this new normal. We're still having executive orders. We're still being told to quarantine, to wear a mask. There's still challenges with the school system, with the health system. It's a very sobering milestone this past week, as you all know, of 100,000 people in the United States have now lost their lives in this pandemic, and that is not something to be glossed over. But that just means that there's ripples of grief taking place, ripples of challenges in many families, many lives. And that's part of the new normal too. There's all sorts of different aspects of the new normal that God is calling us to walk into. And the big news, the bottom line up front for today is simply this: God is preparing us for the new normal. He's not going to allow us to walk through this time unprepared. He wants us to understand aspects of the new normal that we don't even fully understand ourselves right now. But God is preparing us for the new normal. We can have that deep confidence, deep assurance. And we're going to actually take a look at the story of the prophet Elijah and God right now. And in that story, there is wisdom from God on how we can handle and walk through this new normal. God is sovereign over the new normal. He's sovereign over all these disruptions. And bottom line, He is working hope in us. And I hope you see that in a strong way today. So since this is a story, the story plays out in several different scenes. In the first scene, I'm just calling victory. Elijah was a prophet of Israel, and he was serving God's purposes at a time when Israel was at a crossroads. They weren't sure if they were going to continue to follow the one true God, Yahweh, or were they going to follow the gods of Baal. And Elijah actually even asked them, make up your mind. Who are you going to follow? And so he proposes this test where he challenges the prophets of Baal to build an altar and see what their gods do to get it started. And then Elijah says, and I'll see what my God, the one true God, will do. Well, sure enough, the prophets of Baal build an altar, put a bowl on it, and then begin to pray their gods to come and light the altar, and nothing happens. And as you well know, you might have heard the story perhaps before, he even begins to taunt them. And in one of the translations even says, maybe your God has gone to relieve himself. And when I read that as a kid early on, I thought, the Bible talks about that? That was interesting. But Elijah taunts them. And he taunts the prophets of Baal, saying, you guys, your gods are just not true. They're not the ones. And he says, are you done? It took a whole day, till evening. They finally give up. And then Elijah says, okay, watch. So he builds an altar, 12 stones, commemorating the 12 tribes of Israel, puts a bull on it, and then he encouraged them to fill up 4 large jars of water. And he tells them to douse the altar with those 4 large jars of water. And then he says, do it again. And then he says, do it again, a 3rd time. Can you imagine how much water was around that altar and on it and through it? And then Elijah just simply says, okay, God, prove yourself to be true. And listen to what happens. Then the fire of the Lord fell, burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate before the Lord. They cried out to him and said, "He is God, the Lord. He is God." What an amazing scene. In a flash of a second, everything is gone. Stones, bull, wood, water, soil, everything. God couldn't have been more plain who the one true God is. So there's a huge victory here. This is the first scene. So the second scene, though, we pick up in 1 Kings chapter 19. And we might expect that after that great victory, Elijah would be doing a little victory dance around and just high as a kite. But Elijah has King Ahab and his wife, Queen Jezebel. They're not real happy with him. And look how we find Elijah in the scene 2, fear and depression. Elijah was afraid, and he ran for his life. And when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, and while he went himself a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." And then he lay down under the bush, and he fell asleep. What an amazing scene. After a great victory, Elijah is dealing with fear and depression. But you, God, take my life. It's not worth living anymore. But then in scene 3, we see how God responds through his angel to Elijah in his fear and in his depression. This is in verse 5. Then he lay down under the bush, like we just read, and Elijah fell asleep. And all at once an angel of the Lord touched him and said, "Elijah, get up and eat." Don't you realize that Christians do not get afraid? They don't get depressed. They have victories and they just keep on walking in victory. No, that's not how God responded to Elijah's fear or his depression. God had compassion, and he sees the fear and the compassion, the depression in Elijah, and he has compassion for him. And the angel of the Lord says, "Elijah, get up and eat. You need to eat. You're hungry." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and he drank and he lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came back a second time, and he touched Elijah, and said, "Elijah, get up and eat some more. The journey you're about to take is too much for you." So Elijah got up and he ate and he drank again, and he was strengthened by that food, and he traveled 40 days, 40 nights, until he reached toward the mountain of God, and there he went into a cave and spent the night. Elijah has a great victory. He deals with some fear and depression following that victory. God sees him, looks on him with compassion. But then in verse 10 we see this other scene, scene 4. There's not a whole lot of change yet. Listen to this. The word of the Lord comes to him, and he says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah replies, "I've been very zealous for you, God, Lord Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. And I am the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too." This is the second of 3 times that Elijah says, "I'm the only one left." He's dealing with a little bit of a false perception about what God is up to. He's really narrowed in on himself. He's having a little bit of a pity party, which I can't really blame him for. But 3 times he says, "God, I'm the only one you got left. It's just me," in case you haven't figured it out. And there wasn't a lot of change. Even after Elijah had been fed and rested, he still had this attitude, and there wasn't a lot of change yet in his perception and in his response. But then we have scene 5. God's not given up yet. And in scene 5, God takes Elijah and he exposes him to some earth, wind, and some fire. And then we're going to see what he lastly shows up with. But this is what the Lord says to Elijah. "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart, shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. See, God didn't show up to Elijah in the spectacular, in the earthquake earthquake and the wind and the fire. No, he showed up in a whisper, in a still small voice. I hope that you're as amazed as God can possibly make you amazed about what is going on here. The God of all creation, Jehovah, Yahweh, the God of all creation, is whispering to Elijah. This is nothing new in scriptures. In Romans 8 verse 16, the Apostle Paul speaks about the Spirit of God bearing witness with our spirit, affirming, confirming, testifying His Spirit with our spirit. In the innermost recesses of our being, there's that affirmation, that witness, that bearing witness of the Spirit with us, that still small voice, that this is what the Spirit does in us. And then in Psalm 62 verses 1 and 5 in the English Standard Version, David writes, my soul, wait in silence for God. And that's what David implores his own soul to do, is to wait in silence for God. And this is what God used in Elijah's life. He didn't speak through the spectacular. He spoke in the still small voice of a whisper, which is just critical to us getting through the new normal and walking into the new normal. Jesus models this, listening to the still small voice. It says many times in the Gospels that Jesus often went away to pray. And in Mark 1, he got up early while it was still dark, and he was quiet and he was alone. He was with his Father. It's something Cindy is continuing to desire and to hear, that still small voice. I asked Perry Sipe this past week, it's one of the things that he hopes for us as a church, that we would grow in our ability to hear the Lord, especially in stillness and solitude. And then I just had time with Peter Sipe, and he was with Youth with a Mission. And that's one of the core courses that they teach, how to hear from God. And Peter's encouragement to us was for us to know that anyone can hear from the Lord, can hear this whisper. If you're one of His child, one of His children by faith in Jesus, you can hear the whisper of God. It's not just for pastors, it's not just for leaders, it's for every single person who knows Jesus and who has the Spirit of God in them. You can hear the still small witness, the voice of the Lord. What I want you to think about is that, and to realize with all of this is a normal cycle. These 5 scenes that Elijah lives through in his story are pretty normal when you think about it. We all have victories in our life, and many times after those victories we deal with some being down, with some depression. And we need to remember at that point in time that God sees us and He has compassion for us when we're down, when we are afraid, when we are dealing with depression. God has compassion. He doesn't condemn us in that situation. But sometimes, as you know, like I do, there's not the rate of change in us that we would like to see. We would like it to be faster and more predominant, and it's not. We stay the same often, even after God speaks and has compassion. Sometimes in many of us the change is not fast, like it wasn't in Elijah either. But then God whispers to us through His Word, through the written Word, the Bible, through His Spirit, through prayer, through community, through friendships. That's all important as we hear the Word. That's the normal cycle that God often has us in, that we find ourselves in, and that He is working in and through. And that's why we're filming in in our laundry room today, because these are 2 machines that have cycles that go around and around, and they get things clean and dry, and they do good things. And I just pray that God maybe redeems this very normal machine, the cycles of a wash machine and a dryer, maybe the cycles of a dishwasher, to remind you that God is always working in these cycles. And there's hope in that, because He never gives up. I know this. There's been victories in my life. Things have been very, very encouraging at times. But then often after that, I'll feel down. I'll feel discouraged. I got to play some golf last Wednesday. Really enjoyed that. Parred the 18th hole. I was kind of on a high and real encouraged and sensed just was real good. But then that afternoon, I realized I was down. My emotions were down, and I realized that Cindy's dad was the one that I played a lot of golf with. And playing golf last Wednesday afternoon made me realize that I'm missing Jim in a big way. So I was dealing with some being down last Wednesday afternoon, and God looked on me with compassion, not condemnation. But the rate of change in me is not what I'd like it to be all the time, but God's patient with me. He's patient with you when the change doesn't come as fast as he or I or you would like it. He's patient with us, but then he's always wanting to speak to us. And I pray that you know something of this cycle, and that you have hope that even in your victories, God is going to meet you there, but he's going to walk you through the fear and depression that might come afterwards. He's going to look on you with compassion, even when the change isn't there that you might like. And he's going to continue to speak to you, sometimes in a still small voice, even in a whisper. And he's going to do that in us, you and me, here at Christ Community Church, as we walk into this new normal together. We're going to see some victories. But we're also going to be walking through some times where we might be afraid. We're probably going to be dealing with some discouragement too. We just don't know what the new normal holds completely for us. But we do know that God's going to look on us with compassion. We know he's going to be patient with us when the rate of change is not what he would like it to be, or us. And we know that he's going to continue to speak to us. He's going to whisper. Sometimes he might shout, but he's going to whisper. And we can walk into this new normal with all that confidence and with that hope. But my one question to you today, friends, is, are you stuck anywhere in this cycle, anywhere along the way? Maybe you've had a victory, but you've been afraid, or you've been dealing with some despair. Or are you stuck in scene 2 with a depression or despair that is not lifting? Pay attention to that. Are you looking at God correctly? Are you sensing condemnation from him or compassion? I encourage you that if you're thinking that you're seeing condemnation, get some help on that, because that would take us down. God is having compassion toward you. You might be discouraged because of a lack of change, and change is not coming in you like you would want it to come, and you're discouraged. And so I encourage you to keep listening to God, and he can help you get unstuck. His word can, the community, your friends, close friends can help you get unstuck if you're part of this cycle and stuck at some point. This past Monday, I'll close with this of how God spoke to me. This past Monday, I looked at my door in my office again, and there was all these thank yous, wonderful notes from you after Cindy and I came back from our sabbatical a year and a half ago. I've had those up for a year and a half because I enjoy watching those and reading those and hearing again your encouragements of welcome back from our sabbatical. But the Lord was saying, you know what, Jeff? It's time to take those down. It's been a year and a half. So I put them in a bag, and then I put up some new verses. I put these verses up, these reminders to me that I see every day now. God is doing something new. He's walking us into new normals. In our lives personally, in our culture, in this world, but he's doing it here at Christ Community. He's preparing a new normal for us that we can walk in, and there is hope in that. No matter where you are in this cycle, God's not going to give up. He's going to help you get unstuck, and he is going to bring you to a place, no doubt, where you're hearing his voice again, and you're hearing the God of the universe whisper into your ear, there is hope.